Be part of unearthing Africa's gold. Be part of the Joburg Film Festival.
Hi there, my name is Sipho Ngwenya and welcome to another episode of the Joburg Film Festival content series brought to you by MultiChoice. And as you guys know, these conversations are about, the film industry, the television industry involving, some very famous actors, producers, directors, you name it. Today, I have the privilege of sitting next to one of the most acclaimed or decorated directors in SA. This guy, look, when I read the CV, I thought to myself, how did this guy accomplish so much in such a short space of time, right? And I'm glad to be having this conversation with you, Vusi Africa. Welcome.
Thank you, Sipho.
Yeah.
In your intro, you're saying very famous producers and directors. I'm just thinking, do I follow into that category?
Listen, okay. Let's backtrack then.
Yes.
For those people at home who actually don't know who you are, because I had the privilege of checking out your CV and stuff,
Yeah.
right? Just
Yeah,
give them
certainly.
a bit of info about, your background, where you come from, and how you got to be where you are right now.
Well, I was born in Witbank, which is in Mpumalanga, and I was raised in a township called Gwakuqa. And my upbringing stems from theatre culture. My mom is a poet and my dad was a sculptor before he passed on. So I've always been surrounded by, I've always been inspired by work and been inspired by ideas, because that's how I was raised, with the sense of generating ideas. So my journey started with theatre, worked my way up, did a few shows with the National School of the Arts, with National Arts Festival. And then I decided, it doesn't look like there's much money going around.
Abort.
I was just like, no, you know what? And then that's when I went to film school. I went to film school in about 2013. I graduated in 2016. I made my first feature, Letters of Hope, in 2017. And I think it is Letters of Hope that catapulted my career to where it is right now. Because after that film, I never looked back, and I think one thing that sort of has placed me ahead or has placed me within the space is the fact that I tell stories that I know, and I'm always writing from the truth. And more than anything else, I am always looking to inspire. Other than just to make a film, I want to change someone's life who's sitting across there. So I think that's why my work resonates with people, and maybe that's why people feel like I'm prominent. I think it's the work that is prominent. As for Vusi Africa, I'm not prominent as yet. My time is coming, definitely.
Look, man, like I said, in the short space of time, I think the work that you have already done now has certainly made you one of the top directors in the country, maybe even on the continent, right? And I actually like what you said in terms of storytelling, because the theme for this year's Joburg Film Festival is Our Stories, Our Gold. And I think it's about telling that authentic African story that will resonate with the people that right? Which will make you successful. And I think in a way, that's kind of like how you have made it.
Most certainly. If you look at Africa, Africa is very rich in raw material in terms of story. You've got folklore, you've got mythology, you've got the historic context of Africa, the Queen of Sheba, you've got Timbuktu, you've got the 7 temples in Ethiopia. It's just so much wealth that Africa has, and that wealth can be turned into stories. Just that it has been a bit unfortunate that we haven't seen that literature wealth translate into an actual industry in terms of the storytelling. We've seen bits and pieces, of the brilliance that Africa has, and I think the latest is The Woman King, which is a story that stems from Africa. And I think it is important that we are conscious of the raw material that we have. And I think the immediate time we are conscious of the raw material we have, we're going to start treating it as raw material, because I think a lot of times we are often looking for ideas and we are often searching for stories. And the stories are right here within us. The first film I made, Letters of Hope, the story was told to me by Patrick Sibande, who's the son of Gert Sibande, the Lion of the East. And the second film that I made was told to me by my friend. And when we were sitting together and he told me the story, so I'm yet to make a story that I've thought of,
Oh, wow.
The stories that I've made, the stories that, I'll be sitting with you and you'll tell me, I'm like, oh, wow, that's a nice movie. So I think if we are ready to listen and we are ready to pay attention, we can see the raw material. It's all over us.
Okay, so I like where we're going with this, right? Which leads me to my next question around how, as a director, do you go, okay, this is a story I want to tell? Like, I'm sure you probably get a few, stories on your table, right? Where it's like, here's a movie, please can you be a part of this and direct it? How do you go about choosing and saying yes or no?
I think for me, it always boils down to one question. Is this going to live forever? And if yes, maybe. Is this going to change someone's life? If yes, then definitely. For me, I look at those two things because it is important. I mean, looking at the films that have inspired me, films like Schindler's List, those are films that speak to the fiber of society. Even though they address the crises that have happened into the world, but they speak to who we are. They address issues that we've faced, and they bring us closer to humanity. And they make us empathize and understand. So I want to do work that speaks to people. I want to do work that influences people, influences their ideology, influences their decisions. You look at a film like Forrest Gump. It has a huge influence. When you watch that film, if you've got a low self-esteem after watching that film, it's going to dramatically change your life. So for me, I'm always looking for, for stories that are going to impact, and not just impact, but somehow force you to take action to change something in your life that is not going right.
And which is brilliant because in a previous interview, I asked Shamela Miller about representation, in our stories. And I think I also want to pose this question to you to then say, in us telling stories, do you think that there is enough authentic African stories being told on our mainstream platforms, right? Because if you look at what has happened globally, we've kind of like been, in a way, brainwashed by what is a good story to tell. Yeah, right?
Certainly.
What's your take on that?
Certainly. I think, when you look at the work of Thomaseli, you get to understand how far the South African industry comes. We are one of the first industries in the world, and as much as we are so old as an industry, we are still yet to reach our fullest potential as an industry. And because of the fact that we are still to reach our full potential, maybe we are still doing some fact-finding mission, trying to identify the formulas that are working. And in maybe trying to identify those formulas, we are gonna make a few mistakes here and there, and try to emulate what is working for other people, which might not necessarily work for us, and the culture of television that we are seeing now, it is very much influenced by what is happening internationally. And we as South Africa come from a very rich culture of television, which happened in the 80s and the 90s, and when 94 came along, it sort of felt as if, we had to transition from everything, and that rich culture that we had, that gave birth to Bomopeme, that gave birth to all those beautiful stories, that we used to see in the 80s and 90s, sort of faded out, and now sort of came in the new, and the new now was, looking at the global story, the love story that can translate globally. And it doesn't necessarily mean that if something has to translate globally, it must be foreign. It is key that we, even if we're looking at a rom-com, can we look at it from a South African perspective, And I hate speaking about my own work because now it seems as if I'm biting my own tail, right? But if you look at Surviving Gaza is a rom-com. It's a romantic drama, but it is told using the ideology of a township, of the love language that we see in the township, you're chilling at home and then you're hearing the noise outside, and Nomsa is being dragged, being forced to leave. Those are relationships we know. But then when you come into the big screen, the relationships you see are way different. They are so foreign. And that's where the issue of representation comes in. Are we seeing ourselves on the big screen?
Of course.
You know what I'm saying? So we need to see ourselves, and I think that is the work that travels. The work that travels is the work that shows us who we are, you know, and it shows the people of where we come from, and, you know, so that they can also feel like they connect, you know. So I think at this stage, there's some, you know, fact-finding mission that is happening. Maybe 2, 3, 4 years later, you know, we are going to be confident and trust our own raw material and be confident in, you know, in the raw material that that we have. And if you look at the international spaces and how we've occupied them, there is a need for a South African voice. You look at films like Ngwenya, you know, those are films that have spoken to, you know, to the world. Films like Sarafina, you know, films like District 9, you know, those are films that have spoken to the world, you know, from a South African context.
For sure.
So the world does want to see us. We need to represent ourselves. I think we need the confidence to trust the fact that we've got it, and we can then fall onto our raw material and start believing in our story and represent ourselves properly.
On that note, do you though feel that there isn't enough effort, right, from the industry, you know, at large, on trying to create more diversity in our stories, right? Make an example. Some of the movies you've mentioned, they still, you know, centered around apartheid and the struggle, etc., which I think is still relevant. But I mean, I think it's a narrative that's been told, you know, extensively.
Yeah.
Don't you think to some point we owe it to our audiences to try and diversify the stories that we tell on our big screens?
No, we definitely do. We definitely need to diversify the stories we tell on our screens. But I think it's also important that we have an understanding of the fact that we've got our own genres in South Africa. I believe that apartheid has become a genre, just like the Western.
Okay,
You know,
okay,
you know, it's you know, we can make the Western in so many different ways. You know, and the apartheid story, we can make it in so many different ways. I think if we start looking at it as a genre, you know, specifically, you know, as a taste of filmmaking, and then we're going to start becoming more tolerant to it, because we don't want to lose that part of, you know, of our sector. You know, we want to keep telling those stories so that people who are coming behind us can actually always have an understanding. And I think the challenge that we have with the diversity is the fact that there is always a vis-a-vis between what the audience wants to see and what the filmmakers want to make and what the funders are ready to fund. And the funders will always lean towards what the audience wants to see, you know, but nobody is really asking the right question. And the right question should be, which direction should we be taking, you know, from a cultural perspective in our storytelling, you know. And I think once we look at it from a cultural perspective and say, how do we want to influence the world as South Africa, you know, from our stories, from our, you know, right now CBC, they are here making Shaka, you know, and it's kind of hurting. I know MultiChoice has done it also, but it's kind of hurting, you know, to see international corporations coming into, you know, to make our stories, you know, which means that we are not actually doing enough. You know, we don't believe enough. We don't have enough faith in our stories. You know, there was a time when we're missing trends, and maybe now rom-coms are trending. You know, everybody wants to do a rom-com. You know, and now this is trending. Everybody wants to do that. You know, I think we need to encourage uniqueness in our industry. You know, and I think it's spaces like JFF that sort of, you know, bring in different directors, different voices.
For sure.
You know, otherwise those voices wouldn't have a chance in the mainstream. You know, voices that somehow make work that is seen as not so commercial, you know. So I think that the issue is there. The issue is that the industry has a desire to be commercial, and it has a desire to lean more towards what the audience want, instead of wanting to shape a culturally inclined industry like how Hollywood has done. You know, Hollywood is a culture. Superman, Batman, you know, T-shirts, boxers, it's a culture. You know, it just doesn't end on the screen. It translates to clothes, to books, it translates to everything. I think we need to approach our industry from that, you know. And the only way we can do that is by having stories that are centered in who we are.
No, I fully get that. So what I'm understanding is that you're almost saying that we need to view it as a business as opposed to just we are telling a story. All right, so then it translates into the merchandising, into the and those other ancillary rights that you can possibly
and there's
exploit.
too much focus on the audience. You know, the audience also, they don't know what they want to see. Did they know they wanted to see Star Wars before it was made? They didn't know. Did they know they wanted to see The Godfather before it was made? They had no idea that they wanted to see these films. But once these films were made, they were ready to appreciate, you know. So I think it's about having the right thinkers at the top, you know, within our space. You know, people who can actually influence the agenda in favor of filmmakers who are actually interested in telling the stories that that the world wants to see, but they don't know yet that they want to see.
With that said, then, what kind of support then do you think is needed from a director's point of view when in that ideation process? Because, you know, as large corporations like MultiChoice, you know, they've got a very strict policy in terms of how they go about, you know, submissions, etc. Right? And if they're obviously going to be investing into something, there's certain boxes that they want to be ticked for a particular story, which is always informed on research, right? And I think we're still getting there, but what do you think needs to be done more to be able to encourage directors and producers to come forward and trust these corporations to invest into their ideas?
Well, for me, I think I don't think there's a lack of trust. Well, there is trust between, you know, corporations, directors, industry, and so forth. I think the only missing link that we have is a more open policy. You know, I think the industry is it's very much enclosed, you know, too clandestine, you know, to a certain degree that work ends up gathering dust, you know, in the computer, you know, and it never gets out, you know. So I think we need more opportunities that can actually give a platform to diverse voices, you know, instead of maybe us saying we need more diverse voices. Let's create the platforms, you know, to get diverse voices. You know, it's the industry we have in South Africa is a bit funky, you know, where, you know, it's unlike in America where you win awards and then suddenly poof, 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 you know, things are lighting up for you and you've got work lined up. You know, in South Africa things they don't sort of work like that. I don't know, maybe it's just me, you know. You know,
I think we're still getting there. Right?
Yeah, we're sort of still getting there. I think we need a more open policy.
Yeah, look, the red carpet industry is very difficult to manage, especially if you don't have, you know, the dollars backing you.
No, that's true. Yeah, so, that's true. Yeah. That is so true.
But nonetheless, let me bring the conversation back to where I actually wanted us to go around opening up the industry, right? So I'm just going to pose one question for you as a director, and I'm sure maybe there was a point where you felt like maybe this would not happen for you, right?
No, definitely.
In the sense that some directors might feel like they are being, I don't know, overlooked, you know, because the same work goes to the same directors, etc. How is the industry for you in terms of opening the industry? And if it's not, what more needs to be done from a director's point of view?
Well, I come from an independent filmmaking space. You know, I can make a film with 20 cents, honestly. You know, for me, it has never been about money. You know, so I think a lot of times when people speak about opening up the industry, they're referring to funding. You know, so for me, I've never had a challenge of not being in the industry, because I don't view the industry as a particular place that we must all come to. You know, I view myself as an industry. You know, me myself as Vusi Africa, I'm an entity. You know, if I can create work that 2-3 people can see, maybe tomorrow I can create work that 4 or 5 people are gonna want to see. You know, as the years go by, it just gets better and better and better. So I think as young filmmakers, we really need to look at how do we make stories without needing help. First things first. That's the most imperative question that you have to ask yourself. How do I tell a story without needing help first? Because is there anybody who is going to trust you walking into their door and you're just like, I'm Vusi Africa, and everybody looks at you like, Vusi who? You know? But you need to create the work. You know, you need to create the track record. You know, that's the most important thing. And I think young people in today's time, they're so privileged because they're walking around with 4K cameras in their pockets. You know, and so it's so easily accessible to make a film, and everybody wants to act right now. You know, so is there a shortage of actors? Clearly there isn't a shortage of actors. You know, maybe there's a shortage of funding, but the issue of funding gets addressed by track record. You know, so the issue of opening up the industry, I think we need to ask ourselves individual questions as people. Have I done enough to put myself into the space, or am I expecting the space to put me up? because maybe I have an honors degree or I've got an MFA, you know? Do I have expectations because of that? Or am I disrupting the industry by creating work that is disruptive, making people to pay attention to me, you know, and notice that, okay, maybe there's a guy like Vusi Africa that maybe we need to give a chance to and see how, you know, he turns out. You know what I'm saying? So it's always an issue of track record and what can you do without needing help before you
Sure.
say they are closing doors for us. No one is closing doors for anybody.
Yeah.
There's nobody.
Look, Vusi, man, I think you and I can have this chat the whole day, but unfortunately we've been cut short by time. So I just want to say I really enjoyed this conversation. It was very, very fruitful. And I'm sure whoever's watching this right now has learned many, many lessons. And I just want to say good luck for the future, brother.
No, thank you. Definitely. Thank you. Likewise.
Lovely. Well, that's it for this episode of the Joburg Film Festival content series brought to you by MultiChoice. Until next time.